Hey guys, with another One Take review, as well as the 11th part of my Rock Hall review series, where I discuss one album by each of the current year's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame nominees, as well as, do they deserve to get in, don't they, will they, won't they, etc., etc. And today I'm talking about punk godfathers, proto-punk icons, whatever you'd like to consider them, the MC5, and more specifically, their legendary, I guess, is the word to use, live album, Kick Out the Jams. Of course, any band whose most famous album is a live album is always interesting because that seems to be sort of narrowed down to very few artists that include, say, Peter Frampton, among others. However, I think generally speaking, with those kind of artists, it's not hard to see why. Just to continue using Peter Frampton as an example, Frampton Comes Alive is the best Peter Frampton album. That's just generally agreed upon. It's significantly better than most of his studio work. And I think the same goes for Kick Out the Jams. Even with some great studio work, the MC5 really mastered their craft here with what ended up being their debut album. Of course, generally speaking, a live setting can be sort of hindering a band's quality overall. At least in comparison to the studio material, a lot of live material needs to be experienced firsthand, in person, to work best, and sometimes it just really doesn't translate. The energy or the engagement just doesn't translate to physical copies of music or digital copies of music. However, Kick Out the Jams is the exact opposite. I mean, the MC5, like I said, they did some great work in the studio, but I think they really mastered their craft here, and I mean, they're just a ball of rebellion here for the most part, honestly. I mean, they kind of really know how to control their audience, they know how to control the intense atmosphere that I'm sure was going down at what was this point in history. You could even go as far as to say that some songs here, like "Come Together," could not be any better than they are in a live or in a studio setting compared to their live versions here. And I would completely agree with that. I really think that the MC5 know that they're capable of harnessing their live setting here extremely well, and they're willing to do it. I think this is largely due to the fact that the band just have some absolutely raw energy here. I mean, from the explosive intro that is Ramblin' Rose onwards, Kick Out the Jams just is a relentless, just one vicious performance after another with no stopping whatsoever. That actually culminates in, of all things, a rendition of I get another kind of iconic artist at this point, avant-garde experimental jazz icon Sun Ra with his son Starship. The MC5 make their own version of that, and I mean, it's intense, it's energetic, it's the longest song on the album, but it's worth it. It's a fantastic closer, and I mean, Kick Out the Jams just feels like a major flurry of punches one after another, especially if you aren't experienced with punk as a genre beyond maybe something like the Ramones. I personally think that even though this came before bands like the Ramones, this was much more intense and personal. Again, maybe that's just how well the MC5 utilized their live setting, but I do think so, and they just do not let up once throughout Kick Out the Jams. I mean, after all, Kick Out the Jams just feels very unrehearsed, in a good way, of course. I mean, on one hand, a group of stoned teenagers could probably play cleaner and better than the MC5 do here, but at the same time, that's kind of the charm, the appeal of it, you know? This is just the most raw of late 60s rock music, which is saying something considering, well, the late 60s was kind of arguably rock music's first period where things just felt totally kind of aggressive almost. I don't know how to put it in any other way. Even with the early 60s having bands like the Rolling Stones and whatnot, I feel like the late 60s is where rock music as a genre really came into bloom as a sort of very haphazard sort of genre almost. And again, this record picks up that idea. It's a very haphazard performance style, and I think it's better off for it. From the kind of essential to hear title track to the very underappreciated Rocket Reducer number 62, everything here is just lightning in a bottle, and it's all captured throughout this record perfectly. With songs like Motor City is Burning, discussing the police and directly involving themselves in politics like many other late 60s rock bands did, especially, garage rock kind of bands. I think it's kind of inevitable that I talk about the politics of this record as well as not so much what I think of them, but just how legitimate I feel they are and whatnot. Politics and music can be very, very iffy for me. I mean, as I stated in the last entry in the series where I reviewed Rage Against the Machine's self-titled album, I think that the genuineness of an artist really deserves whether any politics belong in their music or not. It kind of goes between laughable or cringeworthy depending on who's doing it. I think that Rage Against the Machine were kind of cringeworthy, very plastic, and I kind of think that the MC5 are maybe a little bit cringeworthy now, but they certainly aren't plastic. It's not so much cringeworthy because they feel dishonest. It's just the fact that the MC5 are an absolute blast from the past. They represent the now dead and completely inactive counterculture movement of the late '60s. It isn't relevant anymore. A lot of what they're saying, and whether you agree or disagree with what is being said on songs like Motor City is Burning, it's kind of hard to deny that it's not really relevant anymore. And that kind of makes for a bit of an odd experience if you're particularly paying attention to the lyrics or the political message or the themes, etc. It does make for a bit of an outdated experience, not necessarily in a good, charming way either, but even still, it feels legitimate. It just doesn't necessarily feel modern, I guess would be the word. I mean, like any movement, the counterculture movement had potential, but it just fizzled out. That's just the way things go, of course. And the MC5 majorly represented that period, that era of America, of American youth culture. And I mean, they just represent that late '60s teenage soldier in training kind of individual, that kind of rebelliousness, that's scrappiness. And I mean, I personally, I think it's very respectable, unlike bands like previously mentioned Rage Against the Machine, that sort of just don't feel like they're being legitimate and that they're just trying to appeal to a younger, more rebellious audience. The MC5 may not be relevant today, and they may not be really clicking with a lot of younger audience members today, but at the same time, if you just take it for what it is, a live album with a lot of over-the-top political themes that came out in the late '60s, that was kind of made for a bunch of like teenagers and people in their early 20s to kind of agree with and go for, and kind of pandering to that audience. I think it's a well-made record. Maybe it's just me kind of looking back on this with a sort of retrospective view now, since the counterculture movement is virtually non-existent, but I do find the MC5 fairly believable, and I can't say anything about the band members' actual political beliefs, especially now that all but one of them are deceased, unfortunately, I think, and all I can say is they come across as fairly legitimate. They may not be, for all I know. For all I know, the actual members of the MC5 were the most major capitalists of all time, for all I know, but, I mean, they just don't feel like it, and I'm sure if you research the members, they probably aren't, and I do think that translates to Kick Out the Jams overall. So, overall, Kick Out the Jams is just about as raw as late '60s garage rock and proto-punk gets. If you're looking for really thought-provoking lyrics or intelligent instrumentals that you can really, just lean back in your chair and begin to appreciate and, stroke your chin to as you begin to think about the complexities of it, this isn't for you. Stay away from this. Absolutely, you'll hate this. But if you're just looking for something fun and enjoyable and rowdy, this is great. This is just an incredibly intense live performance that really ultimately would define punk for the next decade and arguably even today. With that being said, I'm going to give this album 4 stars out of 5. This is a great record that I do recommend if you are into the style of music. If you're not, then I don't really bother. Only listen to it if you want to say you wanted to listen to it, because it is an iconic album, but at the same time, I do think this is for a specific group of people. So, anyways, yeah, 4 stars out of 5. Now, this is usually the point where I sign off and, say, see you guys in the next video and whatnot, but this is my Rock Hall review series, so I'm going to be talking about, do the MC5 deserve to get in, and do they have a chance of getting into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? First of all, as far as do they deserve to be inducted, absolutely they do. Beyond the fact that they're just a musically excellent band, in my opinion, even with their lack of technique, they're incredibly influential. Like I said, this record, along with some other early punk albums like The Stooges' self-titled album and the New York Dolls' self-titled album, Kick Out the Jams really just defined punk and kind of almost invented it in a way, really. I mean, in my personal opinion, the first true punks were the Sonics, but even then they were still technically a garage rock band, so if you want the first true punks with the aesthetic and the overall consistent style that punk has delivered over the years, I do recommend either the MC5 or the Stooges. I really do think that they are the two bands that kind of brought that into the world. Without this band, the Sex Pistols wouldn't have existed, the Ramones wouldn't have existed, none of that really iconic wave of punk would have existed, or at least probably not. Now, as for will they get in, that's a tricky one, because there are multiple factors that play into that. They've been nominated several times now. I'm not sure exactly how many, but it's about like five, I think. We'll just say five. And if you aren't in by then, I think that that's sort of not a good sign of whether the Rock Hall actually wants you to be inducted, but at the same time, they did just introduce something kind of new last year at this last induction ceremony that I think was pretty intriguing. So, for those of you that don't know, rapper LL Cool J was nominated last year, as he has been many times, and he didn't get inducted, but then he did get inducted. There are multiple categories to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Of course, there are performers, but then there's also non-performers, and the other one is musical excellence. Musical excellence was initially created as a revamp of the sidemen category, basically, and that was what it was meant to be. But last year saw the introduction of LL Cool J, or induction, I should say, of LL Cool J to that category, and that completely redefined it. And that's something that I don't think the MC5 will get in through, and I'll talk about that in a moment of what I genuinely think the MC5 will get in through this year. I personally think that Fela Kuti maybe has a chance of getting through into musical excellence this year, but musical excellence is always a possibility now that non-sidemen performers are allowed to be inducted through that category. Now, what I think is actually going to happen this year is there's another category. It's called Early Influences. Again, it's another one with a different initial meaning during its creation. It was supposed to be pre-rock and roll performers, so they inducted artists like, say, Robert Johnson, Charlie Patton, etc., etc. And that was kind of what I was expecting it to continuously be, but recently, I don't even know if it was really technically just last year, but last year they inducted Kraftwerk. Kraftwerk are, of course, electronic pioneers. They, are legends of the genre. It wouldn't be the exact same as it would be today without them. Neither would hip hop, who have, many hip hop artists have majorly sampled Kraftwerk instrumentals. And they got inducted through Early Influences. There was some controversy because, it was the redefining of the name of the category or whatever. There was people complaining about it. I didn't care. Kraftwerk got inducted. That's all that counts to me. And I think that the MC5 will probably get in that way too, because Kraftwerk have been nominated more times than the MC5, and I want to say that Kraftwerk were also only behind Chic as the most nominated but never inducted band for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I could be wrong about that, but still, my point still stands. They've been nominated many times. They got them through a side category just so the Rock Hall could induct them and not have to repeatedly put them on the ballot every year, and instead can get some new fresh faces in, as shown here, which has, on this current year's ballot, I should say, which has some new faces in it that a lot of people I don't think were really expecting. So yeah, I personally think the MC5 will get in through Early Influences this year, and if they don't, I genuinely don't know what'll happen with the MC5 as nominees. I don't know if they'll ever get nominated again. I don't even know if there's really a point to nominating them anymore if you can't even be willing to put them in a side category, because there's no denying that they are one of the most influential bands in all of punk and garage rock music. So with that being said, yeah, Kick Out the Jams, 4 stars out of 5. Incredibly important band to at least punk history, if not just rock music history as a whole. And I think they'll get in, but I think they'll get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I should say, but through a side category. Probably Early Influence, but I mean, musical excellence is always a possibility as well, but considering Kraftwerk got in as pioneers of electronic, MC5 could get in as pioneers of punk. So yeah, anyways, Kick Out the Jams, 4 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that is the end of this review and this entry in the Rock Hall Review series. Join me next time where I talk about nobody's favorite soul musician, Lionel Richie. And I mean solo Lionel Richie when I say that. But anyways, yeah, that is the end of this review. So I will see you guys in the next one.